The camera was a GoPro suction cup to the right doorframe of my Super Cub, aimed forward over the panel. And it was still running when the airplane went into the tussocks at 48 miles an hour. It kept running for 68 minutes after that. I did not see 1 second of what it recorded for 10 months. Here is what I knew on the night of September 19th, 2018. I woke up on my back in wet moss, about 80 yards uphill from my airplane. My right leg was broken below the knee. 3 ribs were cracked on the same side. The airplane was burning hard enough that I could feel it on my face from where I lay, and there was nothing left of it I recognized except the shape of the tail against the light. I had no memory of getting out. I had my belt buckled when I hit. I know that because I always did. 39 years of always. And because the buckle came out of the burned frame 6 weeks later still latched, and a man from the National Transportation Safety Board photographed it that way and put the photograph in a file. Before we get into it, let me know where you're watching from and if you've had an encounter like this. My name is Wayne Barnes. I'm 65. I've lived in McGrath, Alaska since 1988, which is long enough that people here have stopped asking me where I'm from. McGrath sits on the Kuskokwim River about 220 air miles northwest of Anchorage. There is no road to it. Everything here arrives by airplane or by barge, and the barge only runs when the river is open, June through early October in a decent year. 300 people, give or take, depending how you count the ones who are only here part of the year. I flew for a Part 135 outfit off the McGrath field for 26 years, hauling freight and mail and passengers, and once, for 11 straight days, nothing but plywood, into villages you have heard of if you follow the Iditarod and have not heard of otherwise. Nikolai, Takotna, Telida, Medfra. I retired from commercial flying in 2014. And by retired I mean I stopped getting paid. I kept my own airplane and kept flying it. Because if you take a man who has been in the air 500 hours a year since he was 20 and put him on the ground, he does not do well. The airplane was a 1972 Piper PA-18-150, a Super Cub. I bought it in '96 from an estate sale in Palmer for less than a new pickup cost that same year. And I put 22 years and a great deal of money into it, which is what everybody does with a Cub and nobody admits. Fabric over a steel tube frame, 150 horse lie coming out front, carbureted. The same basic engine design they have been building since before I was born. 31-inch Alaska bush wheels on the mains, so I could put it down on gravel bars and sandbars, and sloped tundra that a wheel plane has no business touching. 36 gallons in the wings, about 8.5 gallons an hour if I ran it easy, which gave me 4 hours of fuel and a little to argue with. Yellow with a black stripe. My wife Faye picked that scheme in '98 when we recovered it, and she gave her reason plainly at the time, which was that yellow shows up against tundra and snow and gray water, and if I ever put it in someplace bad, she wanted the search airplanes to see it. She said that in our kitchen with a paint chip in her hand, 20 years before it mattered, and neither of us thought about it again until the fall of 2018. Faye and I have been married 42 years. She was a school aide at the McGrath school for most of that, and she is the reason our son turned out steady. Our boy is Matt. He's 39 now, flies a Caravan out of Bethel for a scheduled carrier, and he has an opinion about his father's flying that he keeps mostly to himself, and did not keep to himself at all during the winter of 2018 and 19. The country I flew is the upper Kuskokwim. From the air it reads flat, and it is not flat. It is a shallow bowl of muskeg and black spruce and old river channels between the Kuskokwim Mountains on the west and the Alaska Range on the east, drained by rivers that wander so badly they cut themselves off and leave oxbow lakes behind like drop change. Big River, Swift Fork, South Fork, Salmon River, Windy Fork, every one of them braids out into gravel bars in the low water of late summer. And those bars are runways if you know how to read them. Black spruce on the wet ground. And black spruce in that country grows so slow and thin that a 60-year-old tree can be 8 feet tall and no thicker than your wrist. White spruce on the drained soil along the rivers. Balsam poplar on the bars. Alder and willow thick enough in the draws that a man on foot makes a mile an hour and hates every yard of it. Under all of it, tussocks. Every step is either on top of a wobbling grass hummock the size of a basketball, or down in the 6 inches of standing water between them. And you get to choose. And both are wrong. Moose in the willows. Caribou some years and not others. Brown bear, which we call brown bear and not grizzly even though it is the same animal. And black bear lower down. Wolves. Wolverine. Beaver on every slough. Sandhill cranes coming through in September in strings you hear a full minute before you see them. I had run a camera in that airplane since 2016, and the reason was not romantic. I got into a disagreement with a fellow over a landing at a strip near Takotna, over who was where and who gave way. And I had no way to show my side. So I bought a GoPro at the Fred Meyer in Anchorage on my next trip in, and started running it every flight. On a suction cup on the right door frame. Up high. Aimed forward over the panel so it caught the windshield and the compass and the top of the instrument stack and a wedge of the right wing. It ran off its own battery. I formatted the card once a month, kept the good landings, threw the rest away. Faye thought it was vanity. It was insurance, and it cost me nothing, and the habit outlasted the argument that started it by 2 years. 9 times out of 10 it recorded nothing but 2 hours of the same horizon and I deleted it without watching. And that is the only reason this story has an ending, because on September 19th of 2018 I had not gotten around to deleting anything. There is a thing about flying in that country that people from outside do not understand. And it is not the danger. It is the arithmetic. You are never more than an hour from somewhere in the air, and you are always more than a week from anywhere on foot. Those 2 facts ride in the same cockpit with you every time you go. And a pilot who has been at it a while does not think about the second one so much as hear it humming. It is why we file flight plans. It is why we tell somebody where we are going. It is why Faye kept a whiteboard in the entryway of our house with my destination and my expected time written on it in dry erase marker, and why she wiped it clean every night when I walked in the door and wrote a new one the next morning if I was going out again. That fall, I was flying Moose. Unit 19D. The general season, which in that stretch of country runs the 1st of September through the 25th, and is the one time of year when a man with an airplane and a freezer has an actual reason to be out every good weather day. I had a spot on the big river, a gravel bar about 1.25 miles long on the inside of a bend with a cutbank on the far side, and a stand of good willow behind it. I had been landing there since 2004. I knew where the soft spots were. I knew which end firmed up after a rain. And I knew the approach well enough that I could have flown it with my eyes closed, and I never once did, because that is exactly the sort of thinking that puts a cub in the alders. I had been out 4 times already that September and come home empty 4 times, which is normal, and I had 2 friends holding freezer space on the assumption that I would not stay empty, which is also normal. On the 19th, the weather was mediocre and forecast to get worse, and I decided to go anyway. And I want to be careful how I say the next part, because I have had 6 years to be honest about it. The weather was legal. It was not good. Ceiling around 3,000 broken, visibility better than 10, light rain that had passed through in the morning and left the air wet. Temperature 42, dew point 39. Any pilot flying a carbureted engine who reads those 2 numbers together should feel a small cold spot open up behind his sternum, and I want you to hold on to them, because they come back.
Quick thing before we get into it. I have a book coming out. It's called the Bigfoot Codex. It's a compilation of all my research and findings. It's kind of my baby, so if you want to check it out, links down below. Now let's get you back to the video.
I got up at 5. Faye was already up, because Faye has been up before me for 4 decades, and I have never caught her at it. She made eggs. I ate them at the counter looking out at a sky the color of a nickel, and she asked if I was going, and I said probably. And she said probably in the tone that means she has an opinion and has decided not to spend it. I called for a briefing at 6:20. Marginal VFR through the afternoon, deteriorating after 1800. A front coming down out of the range that would put the whole area on the deck by 9 that night. That gave me a comfortable day if I got out early and got back by 7. I filed a VFR flight plan. Departure McGrath, destination McGrath. Route down the Kuskokwim to the mouth of the big river, and up the big to a point I gave by latitude and longitude, because it has no name. 4 hours of fuel, 1 soul on board. Estimated time back on the ground, 1800. Faye wrote it on the whiteboard in the entryway. I have that whiteboard in the garage now. I never erased it. The load matters later. So here it is. In the baggage compartment behind my seat, a Kelty pack with a sleeping bag, a bivy sack, a stove, 3 days of food, a first aid kit, a headlamp, parachute cord, a folding saw, and a Garmin InReach satellite messenger I had carried on every flight for a year and paid a subscription on and never once used, game bags and a knife roll, a Winchester in a soft case, 2 gallons of water. I did not have one item of it on me. Everything I had bought for the purpose of surviving a bad day was 6 feet behind my seat, in a pack, in an airplane, and all of it burned. I have made peace with a lot about that flight. I have not made peace with that. I took off at 7:40. The Kuskokwim was low and brown and full of bars, and I flew it at about 500 feet, which is where you fly it, because at 500 feet you can read the water and see the moose in the sloughs and pick out your outs. Past the mouth of the Takotna, past Medfra. The country opens up there and gets wetter, and the spruce gets shorter and the ponds start. Thousands of them. Some of them round as dimes, and in the flat light of an overcast morning they look like holes punched through the ground into a gray sky underneath. I turned up the big river a little after 8:30, and I was on my bar at 9. The hunting part of that day matters in one respect. I walked the willow flats behind the bar for 6 hours in hip boots, and saw 1 cow and 2 calves, and a set of bull tracks 2 days old going the wrong direction. Around 2 it started to spit rain, and I sat under a poplar and ate a sandwich and thought about how good my knees felt, which at 59 is a thing you notice on the days it happens. And at about 11 that morning, working a slough edge half a mile off the bar, I came on a place where the willows were pushed over. They had not been browsed and they had not been rubbed. A swath 8 feet wide, bent down and broken at waist height, running 30 or 40 yards along the slough and then stopping. Moose do that in the rut, and it was the rut. So I looked at it about 15 seconds and thought moose and kept walking. I have thought about those 15 seconds more than almost anything else in my life. I got back to the airplane at 4:15. The ceiling had come down to maybe 2,500, and the rain had settled into that fine interior drizzle that does not look like much and soaks you through in 20 minutes. Walk around, sumps, oil. I strapped in. I clipped the GoPro onto its mount and pressed the button and saw the red light come on, which my hand did without me. I took off south down the bar at 4:31 and turned west for the Kuskokwim. I have gone over the next 11 minutes with the NTSB, with 2 mechanics, and with myself at 3 in the morning more times than is healthy. The sequence does not change. At 4:38 I leveled off at 1,400 feet and pulled the throttle back to cruise. 95 indicated. Wet air. 42 degrees on the outside air temperature gauge. Rain streaking the windshield. At 4:41 the engine began to run rough. Not badly. A stumble, then smooth, then a stumble. If you have never flown behind a carbureted engine, the fuel and air get mixed in a throat with a venturi in it, and air through a venturi drops in pressure, and a pressure drop is a temperature drop, and a temperature drop in wet air makes ice. It builds on the venturi walls and around the butterfly valve and strangles the engine slowly, and it can do it on a summer day. 42 degrees with a 39-degree dew point at cruise power is not marginal. It is the middle of the black part of the chart. Serious icing, cruise power. That is the label on it. The fix is carburetor heat. You pull a knob and it routes hot air off the exhaust shroud into the intake and melts the ice. Every pilot in America learns it in the first 10 hours. I pulled the carb heat, and the engine got worse, which is what it is supposed to do, because the melting ice goes through the engine as water before it goes away as nothing, and there is a bad 30 seconds where you have to leave the knob out and trust it. I left it out. I counted. I got to about 40 and the roughness did not clear. It deepened, and the tachometer, which had been sitting at 2,300, walked down to 1,900 and then to 16, and the airplane began, gently, and without any drama at all, to descend. There was no bang. And that is the part people find hard to believe. A Cub with a sick engine does not fall out of the sky. It gets quiet and heavy and starts down at 400 or 500 feet a minute, and you have a perfectly calm little airplane that will arrive at the ground in 3 minutes. And all that is left to decide is where. I turned back toward the river, which was the right call, and also the call that put me where I ended up. Because the big river there runs through 4 miles of wet muskeg pond and stunted spruce on either side, and my bar was 9 miles behind me, and I was not making it back on a 1600 RPM engine into a headwind. I made a call in the blind on 122.9. Tail number, partial power loss. Position as best I could, putting it down. I said it twice. Nobody answered. There is no radar coverage down there, and the nearest airplane was probably 80 miles away. I did not have time to get to the inReach, and that is the thing everybody asks. It was behind me and down, in a pack, under a rifle case, and I was flying a dying airplane at 900 feet, looking for a place to put it with both hands and both feet busy. There is a version of this where I unbuckle and dig for it. In that version, I hit the ground uncontrolled. What I picked was a strip of ground 400 yards long between 2 ponds, higher and drier than what surrounded it, with what looked from 800 feet like low brush and nothing bigger. From 800 feet, Tucson tundra looks like a lawn. It is not a lawn. I came around into what wind there was, put in full flaps, and brought it down slow. The last thing I remember with any confidence is the airspeed indicator just above 50, and the ground coming up looking wrong. That is the memory, not fear. An assessment that arrived a half-second too late to act on. That the ground was textured in a way that meant the wheels were not going to roll. I have watched the rest, so I can tell it even though I do not remember it, and I will tell it in the order it happened rather than the order I learned it, or none of it makes sense. The mains touched on top of the tussocks and dropped between them. 31-inch tires are enormous, and still not enormous enough for that. The right main dug. The airplane yawed hard right. The gear leg folded and the wingtip went in. It pivoted on the tip, came around about 140 degrees, went over onto its nose and past it, and stopped upside down and canted right with the tail up at maybe 30 degrees. The right door on a Super Cub is 2 pieces. The bottom folds down, the top swings up and clips under the wing. Mine was latched. When the airplane went over, the frame twisted enough that the top half sprung and tore partway off its hinges, and the mount and the camera on it went out through that gap and landed in the moss 50 feet away, on its side against a clump of dwarf birch. Lens pointed back at my airplane. That is the entire reason any of this exists. A 3-inch plastic camera got thrown out a broken door and happened to land facing the right way. I came to in stages. Sound first. Rain on metal. Ticking. Irregular. Then pain. So large and so unspecific that it took me a while to sort out that most of it was my right side. I was not in the airplane. I lay there a while. Long enough that when I turned my head, the light had changed. My airplane was downhill from me and to the left, and it was burning. People imagine a movie fire, an explosion, a fireball. It was not that. A Super Cub is fabric over steel tube. The fabric goes fast, in sheets, curling and dropping away, and in 4 minutes you have a burning skeleton, a cage of tubing with fire running along the inside of it, and the engine and the tanks and the tires burning slower and much blacker. The tires put up a column of smoke I could see standing up, gray against gray, and the smell came uphill and sat on me. Rubber and avgas and hot aluminum and burning nylon, and under it all something sweeter that I worked out 2 days later was my sleeping bag. I was 80 yards from it. I measured it later with a tape. I tried to sit up and could not. So I got on my left elbow and looked at myself. My right leg was wrong below the knee. The bone had not come through, but it was angled in a way legs do not angle. My right side would not let me take a full breath. My right boot was gone, foot bare of everything but a wet wool sock, and my left boot still laced tight the way I had laced it that morning. A boot does not come off a laced foot. I said that out loud, lying in the moss with my airplane burning. I said, that boot was tied. Those were the first words I said after the crash, and I remember them exactly. Then I passed out again. Or slept. I do not know which. And when I came back, the fire was down to a low orange, working in the middle of the steel frame, and it was full dark, and it was raining harder, and I was colder than I have ever been in my life. I spent that night on the ground. It is not the part you came for, but you should know what it cost, because what it cost is why I believe what I believe. The McGrath station dropped to 31 that night. Where I was, in a low, wet basin 20 miles east, it was a degree or two colder. I was soaked before the crash, and I stayed soaked. A wool layer, a fleece, a rain shell, and nothing else. Because everything else was 240 feet away, inside a steel cage, too hot to approach at midnight, and full of ash by morning. I crawled about 20 yards to a stand of black spruce, dragging the leg, stopping every few feet because of the ribs, and got in among the trees where the ground was drier, and broke off the dead lower limbs, which on a black spruce are dry even in rain, and piled them and got in the pile. I did not have a lighter. My lighter was in the pack. I shivered until about 2 and then I stopped shivering. And if you know anything about hypothermia, you know that stopping is not an improvement. I got very calm and very reasonable. I remember deciding I should walk down and lie next to the engine because the engine would still be warm, and being pleased with myself for coming up with it, and my body refusing to move, and I believe my body was right and my brain was not. The aurora came out around 3 when the rain quit. Green, low, moving slow. I lay in a pile of spruce limbs with a broken leg and watched it, and I was not afraid. I have talked to 2 other men who have been where I was, and they both said the same thing about the not being afraid. Somewhere in there I heard something in the spruce. Steady, unhurried, 40 or 50 feet off, going from my left to my right and then stopping. It stopped a long time. Then it went back the other way. I thought bear, and I thought, well, that is it then. And I found I did not care very much, which tells you where I was by then. Nothing came. After a while, I could not hear it anymore. Faye called flight service at 1900, 1 hour after my estimated time back. That is the correct procedure, and she did it without any hesitation at all, which does not surprise me. My flight plan went overdue, and the Alaska Rescue Coordination Center at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson opened a case. Nothing flew that evening. The front the briefer had promised came in on schedule and had McGrath down to a quarter mile in rain by 2000. And there is no such thing as a search in that. The emergency locator transmitter in the tail fired on impact the way it is built to. It transmitted on 406 megahertz for somewhere between 4 and 7 minutes and quit because the coax running to the antenna on top of the fuselage was cut when the tail twisted, and because the fire took the aft section after that. 4 to 7 minutes was enough for the satellite system to register the beacon. It was not enough for a good position. What they got was a box 11 miles across. 11 miles across, over that country, is an enormous amount of nothing, but it lay east of my route line, near the big river, and it matched what Faye had written on the whiteboard. And that combination put airplanes in the right basin, instead of the wrong one. They launched at first light. 4 civilian airplanes were out of McGrath by 8:30, all flown by men who knew me, and none of them asked to be there. Vern Owens found me. Vern was 68 then, flew a Cessna 185 on floats in summer and wheels in the fall, and had been in that country since before I moved to it. He picked up the smoke first. The fire was long out, but the tires were still putting up wet smoke. And he orbited and saw the steel frame, and then he saw me, because I had crawled back out of the spruce at daylight and laid myself out in the open on my back with my arms out. I had done that because of the paint. Because Faye picked yellow in a kitchen in 1998, and I did not have a yellow airplane anymore. So I had to be the thing they saw. Vern circled twice and rocked his wings, and I could not lift my arm to wave. He told me later that he did not think I was alive until the second pass. The Alaska Air National Guard put a Pavehawk out of Anchorage, and they had me in it by 11:40. A pararescueman, whose name I never got, splinted my leg on the ground and asked me questions the whole time. My name, the date, who the president was, and he asked twice whether there was anyone else on the aircraft. And I said no. And he asked a third time, and I said no again and asked why he kept asking. And he said because you are 80 yards from your aircraft with a broken tib-fib, and you did not walk here. That is the first time it was said out loud. It was said by a professional in the first hour, and I did not understand it, because I was hypothermic and concussed, and I thought he was being conversational. They flew me to Providence in Anchorage. 9 days. Spiral fracture of the right tibia and a broken fibula, 3 ribs, a grade 2 concussion, a core temperature of 92.1 when they got a reading on me, and frost nip in 3 toes on the bare foot that they worried about for 2 days and then stopped worrying about. And bruising. The emergency physician noticed it, and the orthopedic surgeon noticed it, and a nurse mentioned it to me directly, which is how I came to think about it. 2 bands of deep bruising, purple going to yellow at the edges by day 3, running across my chest wall. 1 under each arm, starting in the armpit and running forward and down across the muscle and stopping. Both sides. Same height, same width. About 3.5 inches across. The surgeon wrote it down as harness bruising and moved on, which is a reasonable thing for a surgeon in Anchorage to write down. Except a Super Cub does not have that kind of harness. Mine had a lap belt and 1 shoulder strap that came over the left shoulder and clipped to the belt at the right hip. 1 strap. Diagonal. A diagonal strap makes 1 diagonal bruise. It cannot make 2 matching bands under both arms. I said so. He was a decent man and he was busy, and he said the mechanism of injury in a rollover is complicated, and I might have taken the tubing across the chest on the way through. I said sure, and let it go, because I was on hydrocodone, and my wife was in the room, and I had just lost an airplane I had owned for 22 years. The NTSB investigator came to my room on day 6 and taped the interview. I walked him through the flight. I told him about the carb heat and the RPM decay, and he wrote it down and did not react, and I knew from the not reacting that he had heard it 100 times. Then he asked me to describe the egress. That is the word he used, and I told him I got myself out. I did not lie to him. On day 6 I believed I had gotten myself out. There was a hole in my memory where the getting out belonged, and my brain had done what brains do with holes, which is fill them with the most reasonable material on hand. I had crashed. I had been outside the airplane. Therefore, I had gotten out of it. The concussion covered the missing part, and everybody around me agreed with that account, including me. He asked how, given the leg. I said adrenaline. He wrote it down. People do get out of wrecked airplanes on broken legs. The final report came out in 2020. Probable cause. In the flat language they use, a partial loss of engine power due to carburetor icing, which resulted in a forced landing on unsuitable terrain, contributing the pilot's decision to depart into conditions conducive to carburetor icing. That is my accident and my fault, and I have never argued a word of it. There is nothing in that report about how I got out, because I told them I got myself out, and there was no reason on earth for them to look further. If you pulled that report tomorrow, you would find an ordinary Alaska accident with an ordinary cause and a pilot who lived. That is what it is. Everything I am about to tell you sits underneath it where nobody has ever looked. The winter after was bad. Non-weight-bearing until December. A cane until February. 11 months out of an airplane. The longest since 1979. Matt flew up from Bethel in November and sat at our table and told me it was time to be done. And he did it well. And he brought numbers. My age and my hours and the general aviation accident rate in Alaska, which is the worst in the country by a wide margin, and he did not have to look it up. Faye did not take a side. She let her son say it. And after he flew home, she said 1 sentence to me, which was, I am not going to ask you to quit, but I am going to ask you not to lie to yourself about why you go. I spent that winter in a recliner with a leg up and too much time, and I kept coming back to the boot. The troopers went in with the NTSB in early November, before freeze-up, and the investigator did a field examination and documented what he found. The buckle, latched. The melted remains of my pack, the frame of my rifle, the steel parts of the stove. 100 other things that do not burn all the way. He did not find my boot. He did not find the eyelets or the sole either. And a rubber sole leaves residue behind, and a steel shank leaves a shank. It was not in the airplane. or the burn scar, or the 80 yards between the airplane and where I had been lying. And he walked all of it. The pararescueman's question had gone into the record too, and somebody at some point wanted to know how a man with a spiral tibia fracture covered 80 yards of tussock, a laced boot, size 11, off a foot still wearing its sock, and nowhere on that hillside. I sat in that recliner in January of 19 and thought about a camera. The camera had been on. Turning it on was the last thing my hand did before I released the brakes. Every time. For 2.5 years. And it was not in the wreckage inventory. And I had a copy of that inventory and had read it 11 times. Which meant it had either burned down to nothing, which cameras do not entirely do, or it had gone out of the airplane. I called the NTSB investigator in February. He pulled the file while I was on the phone and said, no camera, no mount, no suction cup, nothing that matched. He asked why, and I said I was curious whether it had recorded the engine, which was true and was about 10% of the truth. He said if it went out of the aircraft, it could be anywhere in a 100-foot radius and would be under moss by now, that the site was sphagnum and dwarf birch, and that stuff closes over a dropped object in one growing season. He was not discouraging me. He was telling me the truth about that country. I asked Vern Owens in April if he would fly me in when the ground firmed up. He said yes before I finished the sentence. Then he said, "You will have a hard time on that ground with that leg." I said, "I know." He said, "All right." We went on the 11th of July, 2019. 9 months and 3 weeks after. Vern put the 185 down on the same bar, and we walked from there. 1.25 miles of tussock and slow, and then a half mile of low ground, and it took 4 hours and 20 minutes to cover under 2 miles. And by the end, my leg was a bar of hot iron from the ankle to the hip, and Vern, at 69, was breathing easier than I was. The site had gone green. In September of 18, it had been a black scar with a steel cage in the middle of it. Stinking. In July of 19, it was fireweed, waist high, in full bloom. A solid magenta stand 30 feet across where the fire had opened the ground, because fireweed is the first thing back after a burn in that country, and it does not waste time. The tube frame sat in the middle of it. Rusted orange. The engine still hanging off the front at an angle, and the 2 burned-out wheel rims lying where they had fallen. I sat down in the fireweed next to my airplane and did not say anything for a while, and Vern had the decency to go look at the engine. We searched it, gridded and slow, the way you would for a rifle dropped out of a boat. Vern paced 50 feet out from the frame on the door side, and we worked out from there in arcs, on hands and knees where I could get on my hands and knees, going through moss with our fingers. We found it at 3:50 in the afternoon, 51 feet from the frame, on a bearing of about 210. He said, "Wayne," and I turned and he was standing there holding it. It had been under 2 inches of moss with a birch stem grown up through the mount. The suction cup was still on it. The plastic was chalked from a year of sun and freeze and thaw. One corner of the housing cracked, the lens fogged on the inside. I opened the battery door with a knife. The battery had leaked and made a green mess of the contacts and killed the camera. That was expected. The camera was never the point. The micro SD card came out of its slot clean and dry. I put it in my shirt pocket and buttoned the pocket, then unbuttoned it and took the card out and looked at it and put it back and buttoned it again. 3 times before we started walking. We got back to the bar at 8 and Vern flew us out with the sun still up, and I sat in his right seat with my hand flat on that pocket the whole way home. He did not ask me one question. Vern has been dead 2 years now, cancer. I did not put that card in a computer for 11 days. That was not drama. It was that once I looked, there would be no more not knowing. Either it showed me getting out of an airplane on a broken leg, and I would feel like a fool for a whole winter of wondering, or it did not. I looked on the 22nd of July at 9 in the morning, alone, with Faye at the school doing summer inventory. I made coffee first. I have never been able to drink coffee at that table since. I had not formatted the card since the 1st of September, so there were 19 days of flying on it in 1.5 gigabyte chunks, the way the camera splits long recordings, 51 files. The 19th was 4 of them, because I had gone out in the morning and come back in the evening and the camera had run the whole time it had power. The second file covered most of the day on the bar. Hours of a still shot of my panel and a wedge of wing and gray sky. Until the battery got low, and it shut itself off around 1:30. So it was off when I got back to the airplane. And when I pressed the button at 4:31, it started fresh on what was left, which turned out to be 1 hour and 19 minutes. File 3 is 11 minutes and 4 seconds long. That is the flight. File 4 is 68 minutes and 1 second long. That is everything else. File 3 is exactly what I told the investigator. Takeoff down the bar, the willows going by, the climb out, then level flight in rain, the windshield beaded, the compass swinging a couple degrees each way, the top of the tachometer visible at the edge of the frame if I paused and leaned in, which I did about 40 times. At 9 minutes 50, the audio changes. The engine note develops a hitch. It smooths, hitches again, and 20 seconds later there is my hand on the panel and the note goes worse, which is the carb heat coming on, and the RPM in the corner of the frame walks down. 2300, 21, 19. At 10:40 I hear myself on the radio, my tail number and the words partial power loss. My voice does not sound like a man in trouble. It sounds like a man reading a number off a form. Then the nose comes around, and the horizon tilts, and the audio goes mostly wind. At 10:58 the frame fills with tundra coming up. At 11 minutes and 1 second there is a bang that overloads the microphone, and then the image rotates through about 140 degrees of sky and green in under 2 seconds. And there is a second impact, and then the file ends because the camera hit the moss and the impact tripped the recording, and it took the camera 3 seconds to start a new file. File 4 begins black, because the lens was into the birch clump for the first 4 seconds. Then the camera settled a 1/4 inch, and the view opened up. And what you see for the next 68 minutes is my airplane. I need to describe the frame before I describe what happens in it, because the frame is limited, and the limits matter. The camera came to rest on its right side, canted about 70 degrees off level, so the world in that video runs up and down instead of across. Trees grow sideways out of the frame edge. I rotated the file later so I could watch it the right way around. But the first time through I sat with my head tilted like a dog. The bottom third of the image is blocked. Moss, a fist of dwarf birch, and one birch stem crossing the lens at a diagonal, in focus, about an inch from the glass. That stem is in every frame of the next 68 minutes, and I know its shape better than my own hand. Past it, the ground falls away in a shallow slope, tussock and low blueberry and a few black spruce no taller than a man. And at 51 feet, filling most of the usable frame, is my airplane. Upside down. Canted right. Tail up at about 30 degrees. The left wing folded back along the fuselage. The right gear leg collapsed under. Both prop blades bent back over the cowl, which tells you the engine was still turning at impact, which it was, badly. Sunset at McGrath on September 19th was about 8:16. I went in at 4:42, so it is not dusk light. It is overcast, late afternoon light under a low ceiling and rain, which on a small sensor is not much better than dusk. Gray-green, grainy, everything past 80 feet a smear. The camera is not seeing well. It is seeing enough. The audio is better than the video, which people do not expect. That microphone picked up everything within a couple hundred feet, because the country out there has no other noise in it at all. For the first 4.5 minutes there is almost nothing. Rain on the fabric of the wing, which sounds like rain on a drumhead. Metal ticking as the exhaust cools. Liquid running, steady, which is fuel out of the left tank onto the ground. And I have listened to that sound with my stomach turning over more times than I want to admit, because it is what killed my airplane, and it was still 5 feet from my head. At 4:40 I cough. A wet, short cough from inside the wreck. It is the only sound I make in the whole recording, and I have played that 1 second maybe 200 times. And I do not know what to do about the fact that hearing myself cough frightens me worse than the rest of it. At 5 minutes and 12 seconds the brush moves. Past the airplane and 40 feet beyond it there is a line of taller willow along a wet seam in the ground. You cannot see into it. What you hear is compression. Willow does not snap. It gives. and weight moving through willow makes a hushing, folding noise with a rhythm to it. And the rhythm is what I noticed on about the fourth viewing. 2 beats. Pause. 2 beats. Pause. That noise comes and goes for 2.5 minutes. And it gets closer. At 7:11, everything stops. And there is 40 seconds of rain and dripping fuel, and nothing else. At 7:44, the top edge of the frame changes. I am going to describe this the way I would describe it to an investigator, which is only what is there. A dark mass enters the frame from the upper right, behind and left of the airplane, about 70 feet from the camera. It is vertical, and darker than the willow behind it and darker than the spruce. And at that range, in that light, there is no detail in it anywhere. It is a hole in the picture with edges on it. It moves left across the frame at a walk. It takes 11 seconds to cover 20 feet, and it does not go around anything. It goes through, and the willow closes behind it. Then it comes down the slope toward the airplane, and the distance closes, and the image improves. And I want to be exact about what improves and what does not. A camera that size in that light at 40 feet does not give you a face. It gives you a silhouette with texture on it. Texture is the word I keep coming back to. The outline is not a clean line. It is broken and irregular all the way around, the way a bull moose in velvet is broken, or a bear in June with the winter coat coming off in sheets. And in 3 separate places in that approach, when it crosses a lighter patch of ground, the outline moves independent of the mass. The edge lifts and settles. There was wind that evening out of the southwest at about 8 knots, and you can see the willow tops doing the same thing, and the edge of that shape is doing what the willow tops are doing. Hair. That is what I think I am looking at. It is hair long enough to move in 8 knots of wind. It reaches the airplane at 8 minutes 10 and stops at the tail. Here is the reference I use for height, and it is not a guess. The airplane was upside down, so the main gear was above the fuselage, and the axle of the left main, the wheel that had not collapsed, sat 71 inches off the ground. Vern and I put a tape on it in the fireweed in July of 19. Twice, because I did not trust myself. When it stood beside the tail section, the top of its head was above the left main axle, not level with it. Above it, by about the width of the axle again, call it 7 feet 4 inches. I have run that number every way I know how, accounting for the slope of the ground, accounting for lens distortion at the frame edge, accounting for the fact that it was standing 3 feet further from the camera than the axle. 7 feet 4 is my low number. My high number is 7, 8, and I do not use it because I do not trust it. It stands at the tail 1 minute and 51 seconds, and in that time it moves once. At 8:54 it turns its head. The shoulders stay where they are and the top of the shape rotates a quarter turn and comes back. That is all. It is a small motion, and it is the most human thing in the recording, and it is what made me get up and walk out of my kitchen the first time. Then it goes to the door. Upside down. The broken door was on the near side, facing my camera and slightly away. For the next 80 seconds, you see the back of it. It goes down low and the mass compresses and spreads and you lose the shape against the dark of the fuselage. And you hear it. You hear aluminum. You hear tubing move, a scraping, sustained, and then a sound like a door being wrenched, which is what it was. Because when the troopers documented the wreck, the lower half of that door was folded back on itself at 160 degrees, and the NTSB put that down to the rollover. At 9:58 there is a sound. Low. Short. 3 notes. Closer to a grunt than anything else I can name. If you have heard a bull moose in September, you are in the neighborhood. But the pitch is lower and the spacing is wrong and it comes out on an exhale with a lot of air behind it. It happens once and never again in 68 minutes. At 10 minutes and 22 seconds it comes back up out of the door frame and it is holding me. By my own count in a notebook I kept for a year, I have watched that section 340 times. It comes up out of the door frame backward, and slow, and the slowness is what stayed with me. No wrench, no heave, no jerk. It rises out of the opening, the way a man comes up out of a crawl space carrying a box of records he does not want to drop. I am 194 pounds. It has me under the arms. You can see that when it clears the fuselage. because for 2 seconds my body is up off the ground and the silhouette separates against a bare patch of pale gravel behind the airplane. My back is against its front. My head is over to the left and down on my chest. My arms hang. Its forearms come from behind me and cross my chest, and its hands are somewhere in front of me where my body blocks them. Under the arms, across the chest wall, one band on each side, about 3.5 inches across. The surgeon in Anchorage told me the mechanism of injury in a rollover is complicated. He was a good doctor, and he was wrong. And I have the reason he was wrong on a memory card in a fire safe in my garage. It turns and starts up the slope, across the frame left to right, past the camera at a closest point of about 19 feet. That is the clearest I ever see it. 4 seconds, and it is moving, and it is a small sensor in bad light, so those 4 seconds are smeared. I have pulled every frame out of them and printed the good ones, and I still cannot tell you what its face looks like. Here is what those 4 seconds give me. The shoulders are wider than the hips by a lot. A heavy man is not built that way. A bull is. The head sits low and forward, close to the shoulders, without much neck between them. The arms are long, and I mean that when it stands upright with nothing in its hands, which happens later. The hands hang 6 or 8 inches below where mine hang. The legs are thick and they bend forward at the knee, and it walks fully upright. No forward pitch of the spine, no knuckle contact with the ground at any point in 68 minutes. And the gait, carrying 200 pounds of me, does not change. It does not shuffle. There is no compensation in it. The last quarter second of the pass is where the boot comes off. My right leg is broken below the knee and hanging, and it drags. It catches. My leg swings, and the boot comes off and stays behind. You can see it dark on the pale gravel at the frame where it separates. I stepped through that section 1 frame at a time at 2 in the morning in July of 19 and found the frame where it is on my foot and the frame after where it is not, and the whole thing takes a 30th of a second, and I sat back in my chair and said out loud, alone in my house, there it is. I had spent 9 months on a boot. It goes out of frame at 11 minutes 18. Uphill and to the right, which is the correct bearing for where the guard found me the next morning. Then there is nothing for 10 minutes and 29 seconds. That is a long time to look at a wrecked airplane with rain on the microphone, and I have never once fast-forwarded it. Nothing in the picture changes across those 10 minutes. It is 5 in the afternoon under a solid overcast, and that light does not move. It sits gray and even on everything, which is why the camera could tell me a shape had walked through the frame, and could not tell me one useful thing about it. At 21 minutes and 47 seconds, the picture warms. Not a flash. The left side of the cowl goes a shade lighter and flickers, and over about 90 seconds it grows. Fuel had been running out of the left tank downhill and back under the engine for 22 minutes, and it found the exhaust. And at 23:10 the sound comes up. A soft thump you feel more than hear, and after that the whole frame is orange. The fabric goes in about 4 minutes, in sheets. Exactly the way I described it. You can watch the shape of my airplane disappear and the steel tube frame emerge inside it like a drawing under tracing paper, and the fire lights the whole slope. That is the joke at the middle of this. For 21 minutes, while the part that mattered was happening, the camera could barely see. Then my airplane burned and turned that hillside into the best lit place in 100 miles, and it lit it for 44 more minutes, and at 26 minutes and 18 seconds it came back. It comes back toward the tail, except the tail is on fire now, so it stops 30 feet short on the uphill side, at maybe 65 feet from the camera. Full firelight on it, moving light from a moving source, which is the best possible lighting for showing you a shape and the worst for showing you detail. Because everything is either lit hard or in shadow and the shadows swing. It stands there. It stands there for 17 minutes and 40 seconds. I timed it with a stopwatch because I did not trust the counter. In that time, it changes position 4 times. It shifts weight, left to right, twice. Once it turns its head to look uphill, the direction it had carried me, and holds that about 8 seconds, and turns back. And at 39 minutes even, it raises its right arm and puts its hand flat against the trunk of a black spruce beside it. At a height I measured later on that same tree, because that tree is still standing and I have stood at the bottom of it. 6 feet, 1 inch. which is shoulder height on it. Elbow bent, arm at its side, the way a man leans on a post. Then it lowers the arm. It is not agitated, and that took me longest to accept. It does not pace or circle or display. It is standing beside a burning airplane in the rain with its arms at its sides, watching it burn, and I have gone through those 17 minutes at quarter speed, looking for one frame where its attention is anywhere but the fire, and there is not one. At 44:31 it turns and walks up the slope to the northwest, unhurried, and the firelight lets me follow it 110 feet before the willow takes it. The file runs another 23 minutes. The fire drops. The frame goes dark and orange and then dark. At 68 minutes and 1 second, the battery quits, and the recording ends in the middle of a frame. I sat at my kitchen table in McGrath on the 22nd of July, 2019, and closed the laptop and put both hands flat on the table on either side of it. And my coffee had gone cold and skinned over, and the school bus went by outside because it was summer school, and I sat there until Faye came home at 4. I told Faye that night. I did not show her. I told it at the table, in order, from the cough to the boot to the 17 minutes, and she listened the whole way without saying anything. And when I finished, she got up and went to the sink and stood with her back to me and ran water she did not need. Then she said, "Is that what the bruises were? 42 years." That is the first thing she said. She watched it 4 days later. She asked to. She sat in my chair and I stood behind her with my hands on the back of it, and she watched all 68 minutes. When it came up out of the door with me in its arms, she put her hand over her mouth and left it there. When it walked into the willow at 44:31, she watched the empty frame until the fire went out, and then she said, "We are not putting this on the internet. We never have." It has been 5 years. Vern Owens saw it in August of 19. He watched it twice, and when it was done, he sat back and rubbed his jaw and said, "Well." Then he said, "I have heard that noise. On the Nixon Fork Road, about 91, at night, window down." He had told his wife it was a moose and had known at the time that it was not, and that was all he was going to say about it. And he got up and put coffee on and started in on the price of avgas. I let him. The third person is Howard Griffin. Howard was the area wildlife biologist for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game out of the McGrath office for 19 years, retired in 2012 and stayed, which almost nobody does. He is the most careful man I know. I gave him the file on a thumb drive in September of 19 and told him nothing except that it was from my accident and I wanted his opinion on the animal in it. I did not tell him what to look for. I did not mention the bruises. He kept it 11 days, then called and asked if he could come by. He sat at my table with a legal pad and went through his notes in order like a man giving testimony, which is more or less how Howard talks. He said it is not a brown bear and gave 5 reasons. I will give you 3. A brown bear stands up to see and smell, and it does not stay up long. 30 seconds is a lot. A minute is unusual, and this animal is upright for the whole 17-minute sequence, and for every second of the carry. Second, a bear that stands drops to all fours to travel, always, and there is no four-legged movement anywhere in the recording. Third, a standing bear has a shoulder hump that shows in profile even in bad light, and there is a rise across those shoulders in the video, but it is flat, not humped, and Howard said he had looked for that hump on purpose and could not put it there. Then he said the thing I did not expect. He said, "Wayne, no North American carnivore carries. Bears drag, wolves drag, or they carry small things in their jaws. A bear that finds a dead or injured animal will drag it by mouth to cover and cache it under brush and dirt, and it will stay near the cache and defend it, and the drag mark is a single furrow with the carcass on the ground the whole way. That video does not show a drag. It shows a lift and a carry, upright, using 2 forelimbs, over uneven ground, for a distance you say is 80 yards, and then a release. And then it did not eat you, and did not cache you, and came back and stood beside the fire." He put the pen down and said, "I do not have a species for you. I have been doing this since 1981 and I do not have a species for you." I asked what he meant to do about it. He said nothing. He said there is nothing in that file that survives review. One low-light video off a consumer camera, uncalibrated, No scale and frame, but an airframe. I measured myself. One witness who was unconscious for the event, and a chain of custody that includes 10 months under Moss. He said, "I believe you, and I cannot help you." And both of those are true. I have not shown it to anyone since. Let me work the explanations, because you are working them right now, and it is only fair. A person, a man 7 feet 4, in the Willow at 4 in the afternoon on the 19th of September, 20 miles from the nearest structure, who pulls a stranger out of a burning wreck and carries him 80 yards and sets him in the moss and never says a word and never reports it, and then stands and watches the airplane burn for 18 minutes. I have thought about that man. The tallest man in Alaska is not 7'4", and the outline moves in the wind, and a man would have taken the inReach out of the pack, or walked out and told somebody. And there was a great deal of news about this accident in that part of the country for about a week. A costume then. In rain, 20 miles into the Muskeg, walking up on a burning airplane, a bear that carried me. Howard covered that, and so have I, and there is no version of it that works. Hallucination on my part. Which is the one I like best because it is the only one that lets me sleep. The trouble is that the camera made the recording, not me. And I was unconscious in the airplane the whole time. And there is a cough on the audio at 4:40 to prove where I was. Camera artifact. There is nothing in a sensor that produces a 7-foot bipedal shape walking across a frame for 4 seconds in front of a burning airplane and throwing a shadow uphill that moves when the fire moves. I ran out of explanations in about 2020. What I have instead is a debt. And I have never in my life known less what to do with anything. I bought trail cameras in the spring of 2020. 4 Browning Strikeforce units and a Bushnell, all no-glow infrared, all on lithium AA cells. Because alkalines quit at 20 below, and lithium runs to 40 below, and I was not going to be able to service them in winter. 32 gigabyte cards, stills only, 3-shot burst, 30-second delay. Because video eats a card and a battery, and I wanted a year unattended. I flew in on the 28th of June in a 1956 Cessna 170 I had bought that March. Faye knew where I was going. I put it down on the same bar and walked in with a pack. And it took 2 hours and 40 minutes, because the leg was better and I knew the ground. I set them in a ring around the burn. One on a black spruce 40 feet uphill of the frame, facing the wreck. One on the spruce it had put its hand on. One at the willow seam it had come out of, aimed along the game trail. One on a poplar at the edge of the wet ground, and the Bushnell high on a bigger spruce at the top of the rise, aimed downhill to cover the approach. I sat on a flat granite boulder at the top of the rise for an hour before I walked out, which was the first time I had been alone on that ground since the guard picked me up. 71 degrees. Mosquitoes. Fireweed going over into cotton. From up there I could see the steel frame and the black outline of the burn, and, past it, 4 miles of pond and spruce and nothing. I said thank you. Out loud. On a rock. I have not decided how I feel about that yet. I pulled those cards on the 14th of September. 11 weeks. Between the 5 cameras I had 4,000 and change images, and I sat with them 2 nights. Moose. A cow and twin calves working the willow seam through most of July. A small black bear at the burn 8 times, up on the steel frame twice. Which is a bear doing what a bear does. Wolves, 5 of them. One night in August at 2 in the morning. Coming down the game trail single file, and the 4th one stopping to look up at the camera, and the 5th one walking into the back of it. Wolverine once. Lynx twice. Snowshoe hares beyond counting. And a great horned owl sitting on the top longeron of my airplane at 11 at night on the 3rd of August, which I printed and framed, and it is on the wall in my shop. And on 4 separate nights, out of the 11 weeks, the willow seam camera fired on nothing, not a false trigger. A 3-shot burst on a no-glow unit with an 80-foot detection range, showing a game trail, no subject, at 11:41, and again 30 seconds later, and again at 11:42, and then nothing the rest of the night. July 11th, July 30th, August 9th, September 1st. All 4 between 11 and 1, all 4 on that one camera. And in the 3rd image of the September 1st burst, the willow on the right side of the trail is bent over at about 7 feet, And it is not bent over in the first image 30 seconds earlier. That is all 2020 was. Bent willow and empty frames. If it had ended there, I would have talked myself out of it inside 2 years. 2021 is what I cannot talk myself out of. I put the cameras back in on the 9th of June. 2021. Same positions. Fresh lithiums. Formatted cards. When I got up off the boulder to leave, I did something I have done every trip since. I left a can of peaches on the rock. It was not a ceremony. I did not open it, or arrange it, or say anything over it. I had 2 cans in my pack. I ate one, and I set the other on the flat of the boulder and walked out. It was a stupid impulse, and I did it every trip after that one. I came back on the 21st of August. A clear morning with the leaves just starting. The can was gone. That means nothing. A bear opens a can of peaches. A raven works one over. The boot was on the rock. Sole down. Squared up on the flat of the boulder. Toe pointed downhill, the way you set a boot by the door. It was my boot. 10-inch leather. Size 11. The right one. And the laces were still tied in the knot I had tied at 5:30 in the morning on the 19th of September, 2018. In my entryway in McGrath with Faye's whiteboard 3 feet away. 3 years outdoors. The leather had gone gray and hard. Sphagnum had grown into the welt on one side and dried there. Something had chewed the heel, and Howard looked at it later and said "Vole" without hesitating. The inside was full of dirt and moss and a spider. I sat down on the ground next to that rock and could not get up for a while. That is not a figure of speech. The camera on the spruce 40 feet uphill of that rock had fired at 3:41 in the morning on the 4th of August. 3 images, 30 seconds apart. Image 1 is the boulder, gray in the infrared, the can of peaches on it, nothing else in frame. Image 2 is the boulder with a hand on it. That is the whole content of image 2, and it is the one piece of evidence I own that I have never gotten used to. The hand and about 11 inches of forearm come in from the right edge, at the level of the top of the rock. No shoulder, no body, nothing but arm, which means whatever it was attached to stood outside the frame to the right and reached in. And that camera is on a 70-degree lens, so it was standing close. The hand is on the rock, palm down, fingers spread. 5 fingers. The thumb sits lower on the hand than mine, and is shorter against the fingers than mine. The back of the hand and the forearm are covered in hair that reads pale gray in infrared the way all dark hair does, and the hair on the forearm lies flat and runs toward the wrist and stops short of the knuckles. The fingers are thick through the middle joint, and the nails are dark and short, and squared off across the end of the finger the way mine are. I went back and measured the span it covers with a tape. On that boulder, in that position, from that camera angle, index tip to little fingertip, 8 1/4 inches. Mine is 6 1/2 and I wear an extra large glove. Image 3, 30 seconds later, is the boulder with the boot on it and the can gone. 30 seconds. It set my boot on that rock and took the peaches and was clear of an 80-foot detection zone inside 30 seconds. At 3:41 in the morning, and the other 4 cameras in that ring did not fire once that night. I have checked those timestamps against each other 4 times. I got the card home and put it up on the laptop, and Faye stood behind me, and neither of us said anything for a long while. And then she said, "It went and got it." It kept my boot 3 years and brought it back to the one flat rock on that hillside where I sit. There is one more person in this, and he is the reason I stopped. Chester Ross runs a trapline out of a cabin on the big river 9 miles downstream of my bar. He is 79. He has been on that river since 1974. He is not talkative, and he is not friendly, and he is the most competent man I have ever met in the woods. I stopped in on him in September of 2021, after the boot, and asked him whether he ran that basin. I did not tell him why. He said he ran the river and the sloughs and did not go up into that ground. I asked why not. He said the fur was no good there, which is a true statement about wet muskeg and is also not an answer. And he knew I knew it. And he looked at me for a while. Then he said, "How long have you been going up there?" "Since 19, I said. He said, "Quit." I asked what he meant. He said, "Quit going up there. It does not want anything from you, and you have decided it does. You are going up with cans and cameras and making it into something. And it is not something. It is an animal, and it lives there. And you crashed in its country, and it did whatever it did, and that is finished. And you keep going back. I said it saved my life. And Chester Ross said, then let it alone. That is what you owe it. I have turned that over for 3 years, and I have not found the flaw in it. I pulled the cameras on the 12th of June, 2022. All 5. I did not put them back. I sat on the boulder about 2 hours that day, longer than I ever had, and ate a sandwich and looked at the steel frame going orange down in the fireweed, and thought about what a strange piece of ground it is. 4 square miles of pond and spruce with nothing in it anybody wants. 20 miles from a town of 300, with an airplane skeleton in the middle and a rock at the top of the rise. I left the Peaches. Last one. I have not walked in there since. That was 2 years ago. I fly over. That is the compromise I have made with myself, and I know how thin it is. Every year on the 19th of September, weather allowing, I take the 170 up the big river at 600 feet and go over that basin and put the left wing down and look at the burn scar, which is still visible from the air and will be for another 20 years, and I rock the wings once and go home. 90 seconds. Faye knows where I am going and has never asked to come. I am 65. I have 14,200 hours and I intend to fly until they take the medical. And my son has stopped arguing about it, which is worse than the arguing. The card is in a fire safe in my garage with the deed to the house and Faye's mother's rings, and 1 copy of the file on an external drive beside it, and there is no 3rd copy anywhere in the world. I have never uploaded it and I never will. Telling you about it is not the same thing. And I have thought hard about whether even this much is a violation, and decided it is not, because I am not giving you a location that means anything, and there is nothing here for anybody to go find. People will put a word to it. I know which word. I have never said it out loud, and I am not going to start, because the second you name a thing, you stop looking at it and start looking at the name. Here is what I have instead of a name. On the 19th of September, 2018, at 4:42 in the afternoon, I put a 46-year-old airplane into the tussocks because I did not respect a temperature and a dew point. I was upside down and unconscious in a steel cage with fuel running out of the wing onto the ground, and 22 minutes later, that fuel found the exhaust. Nobody was coming. The beacon was cut. My messenger was in a pack behind my head. Faye would not make her phone call for another 2 hours, and the airplanes would not launch for another 15. Something came out of a willow seam, took hold of me under the arms, lifted me out through a broken door, carried me 80 yards uphill, set me in dry moss above the wet ground, and went back and stood in the rain and watched my airplane burn until there was nothing left to watch. I have a video of it. It is the worst thing I have ever seen, and it is the best thing that ever happened to me. The cameras are down. The boot is on a shelf in my shop next to the framed photograph of a great horned owl sitting on the top longeron of a Piper Super Cub. The burn scar is out there, going green a little more every summer. And somewhere in 4 square miles of pond and black spruce that nobody has any reason to walk into, on a hillside with a flat granite boulder at the top of it, something is going about its life in country it has been in a great deal longer than my family has been in this state. I do not know what it is. I know what it did. Every September I go up the river and I rock the wings, and I go home, and I let it alone.